If your parents raised you in the 1970s, their approach to parenting was probably unlike anything you've encountered today. You can probably sense it when they talk about their own childhood, or when they brush off things that might make modern parents panic, things they never thought twice about. The way they shrugged off what would today be considered dangerous, the nonchalance in how they managed challenges, it was a product of a different mindset. Their belief that children were far more capable than anyone gave them credit for shaped the very fabric of how they raised you. It wasn't just a philosophy, it was a deeply ingrained psychological framework, one that in many ways created some of the most resilient, independent children in modern history. But what nobody talks about is that same framework also shaped you in ways that go beyond simple nostalgia. It didn't just nurture independence, it influenced how you formed connections, how you dealt with emotions, and how you learned to navigate the world. Looking back, that belief in children's toughness, that hands-off approach to parenting, didn't come from nowhere. It was a reaction to the world they were living in, the pressures they faced, and the psychological context they were navigating. Your parents weren't just operating from instinct. They were guided by deeply held beliefs about resilience, independence, and what it meant to be strong. But while those beliefs gave you freedom, they also came with unspoken consequences. The same framework that fostered self-reliance in you also shaped how emotionally available your parents could be. The psychological survival strategies they used, no language to describe the emotional toll of being caught between wanting to break free from traditional roles and being expected to do it all. She had to maintain a spotless house, be the perfect mother, and yet still deal with the emerging societal pressure to have a career, to find fulfillment beyond the domestic sphere. And for some mothers, the easiest way to survive this contradictory world was to send their children outside, to let them roam free for hours. It wasn't just about building independence, it was a psychological lifeline, a way for her to survive the tension of impossible expectations. But this wasn't just about your mother. Your father's psychological world was shaped by an entirely different set of pressures. While your mother was caught in the contradictory expectations of the times, your father's identity was defined by a narrow set of roles. He was the provider, the disciplinarian, the authority figure. His worth was tied to his ability to provide financially and command respect. But these roles left little room for emotional depth.
His emotional world was restricted, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't have the tools to express care. His upbringing had taught him that emotions were a sign of weakness, that vulnerability was something to be avoided at all costs. And so, when he let you figure things out on your own, when he didn't hover over your every move, it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he had no framework for showing care beyond physical presence and financial stability. When he came home from work, sat in silence, or gave you a pat on the back, it was his way of showing love. It was all he knew. This psychological distance wasn't about emotional neglect. It was the direct result of the tough, emotionally restrained environment your father had grown up in. Raised by parents who had lived through the Great Depression and World War II, your father had learned that survival meant suppressing emotions. Toughness was a survival mechanism. Emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. This philosophy shaped not only how he parented you, but also how he lived his life. But while your father's way of expressing love may have been silent, it didn't mean there weren't cracks in the system. The emotional restraint that your father practiced didn't always protect your family from the dysfunctions that came with it. Alcoholism, for instance, wasn't a disease. It was just what your dad did after work. Kids in that environment learned to gauge their parents' mood by the sound of a bottle being opened, or by how much silence filled the room.
They became hyper-vigilant, always on edge, trying to predict how the next moment might unfold. The unpredictability of their parents' emotional worlds created a landscape of tension and uncertainty. In homes like these, physical punishment wasn't questioned. It was discipline, not abuse. When your father punished you, when the neighbors nodded in agreement that kids need respect, no one considered the emotional toll it was taking. The same went for marital conflict. Arguments were loud, doors were slammed, and children sat in the background, learning that anger was normal, that contempt was just part of adult relationships. And all of this unfolded without any understanding of mental health. Depression, anxiety, these weren't recognized as conditions needing treatment. They were just part of the everyday struggle. Your mother's emotional unavailability wasn't postpartum depression.
Your father's explosive temper wasn't PTSD. These were simply parts of life, parts of a world that didn't have the language or the tools to understand or address them. And what's perhaps the most striking part of this was the silence that often followed. Children experienced all these things, the mood swings, the fights, the punishments, without anyone explaining what it all meant. There was no space for discussion, no adult to help them make sense of it. No one told them that dad's drinking wasn't their fault, or that physical punishment wasn't a reflection of their worth. So children did what children do. They tried to make sense of the world with the limited information they had.
They learned to become hyper-independent because depending on adults felt unreliable. They suppressed emotions because expressing them led to punishment. They learned to manage other people's feelings because sometimes their own stability depended on it. This is the other side of that independence, that resilience that people often celebrate. It wasn't just about freedom, it was about necessity. They became capable because they had to. They learned to handle everything on their own because asking for help was never an option. And this independence became the lens through which they saw the world, including how they were disciplined. Their parents didn't just limit emotional expression, they built an entire system around unquestioned obedience. Because I said so wasn't lazy parenting to them, it was a philosophy. Children weren't supposed to understand the reasons behind the rules, they were just supposed to follow them. Questioning authority wasn't seen as critical thinking, it was seen as disrespect, and that disrespect needed to be shut down immediately. Their parents genuinely believed that children who learned to obey without questioning would function well in the structured systems of school, work, and eventually marriage. But here's the thing, this rigid approach to authority didn't just create obedient children, it also shaped how those children related to authority later in life. Some became expert people pleasers, able to anticipate and meet authority figures' expectations before they were even asked. This made them adept at navigating social situations, but it often came with an underlying fear of rejection or disappointing others, making it hard for them to assert their own needs. On the flip side, others developed a strong resistance to authority. They rejected control and built their identity around defying anyone who tried to exert it. For them, rebellion became a form of self-expression, but it sometimes made it difficult to work within systems or collaborate effectively.
And then there were those who avoided conflict altogether. Growing up in a home where disagreement was treated as disrespect, they learned to suppress their own emotions to maintain peace, often making it hard to confront issues later in life. This avoidance became their way of handling the emotional chaos they were raised in. The emotional landscape their parents navigated, shaped by silence, emotional restraint, and rigid authority, became the blueprint their children carried into adulthood. This foundation of self-reliance and independence came from necessity, not just freedom. They learned to rely on themselves because emotional support was often absent, and they became incredibly capable as a result. However, this toughness also made it difficult to express vulnerability or ask for help. The very strength they developed came at the cost of their emotional depth. What's fascinating is that the very traits that made you strong, the independence, resilience, and capability, also made it harder to navigate emotions or ask for support. This isn't about blaming your parents. They did the best they could with the tools they had, shaped by a society that valued toughness and emotional restraint. They genuinely believed they were doing better than their parents had, and in many ways they were. But what you inherited is complex, a blend of strength and emotional limitation. Now, as you navigate your own life, you have the opportunity to take what worked, understand what didn't, and decide how to move forward. Each generation builds on the past, trying to preserve what worked while adapting to new realities. The strengths your parents gave you are real, but so is the chance to redefine how you handle vulnerability and emotional connection moving forward. If this perspective on 1970s parenting resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on how these patterns have shaped your own life. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going.